Oh, stuck in your house? No.
My son helped me move them, put them inside a box. Beehives.
Uh-huh.
But we didn't cut them from the
Uh-huh.
So you still have some in a structure?
So we tried with bees before.
Uh-huh.
So we fed them throughout the winter. And the first day of spring, they all
Flew away. Oh no.
So we put those boxes in the shed.
Uh-huh.
And then I started seeing these this year in the shed.
Ah. So they found the old boxes and moved in. Yeah, that's a not uncommon. Beekeepers will often stack their equipment out, you know, and they'll find, oh, there's a new colony in one of my empty boxes.
So I moved the other boxes into the garage because
No.
I don't know what to
You're not
do.
paying attention to me.
I saw them last night. Big one. But we moved them. There's a bunch. I mean, we
We're
put
going to go ahead and get started because I like to start on time. And I'm already late. Thank you guys for coming to our second attempt at homestead beekeeping. I'm Debbie Holland. I'm chair of the Peterson Community Garden. Charlene Martindale is the secretary for Keep Huddle Beautiful, and Marjorie Davis, who is the chair of Keep Huddle Beautiful, wasn't able to make it today. And just a little plug for Keep Huddle Beautiful Foundation. We are looking for board members. We're on a pretty sparse level of individuals that help support Keep Huddle Beautiful. So if anybody or you know people that are interested, we would love to just go online and there's a board application, or just join Keep Huddle Beautiful. Be sure, and with this, we'll be able to send you emails for other events that we have and garden work days that we have. So that's my advertisement. And now, we'll step over. I want to introduce y'all to Scott Purcell. Scott, fortunately, lives about as far from the garden that direction as I live from the garden that direction. So we see each other a lot. And Scott came to me one day when I was pulling weeds and sweating and everything and said, would y'all be interested in a beehive? And I went, yes. And I had some experience with beehives, only well, tertiary, when my daughter was in Hawaii and they had hives, and you know, I didn't get there very often, but I did get to participate in it, and just the whole thing intrigued me. And so Scott, first, he's an educator in terms of teaching people about bees, hence that's why he's here today. And he's just passionate about what he does, and I love people that have passion and like to spread it. And I want to read you, I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but I was asking him about, what about some kind of a little intro to you. So let's see. Get ready to buzz with excitement because we have the perfect event for all aspiring beekeepers out there. Join us for a day of fun, learning, and hands-on experience as we delve into the fascinating world of beekeeping. Our event includes an instructional element where we'll cover basics of bee biology, queen characteristics, and hive types. You'll learn about the different types of honey harvests and how to put wax to good use. And this is not exactly what I was looking for. There was another one that, can you, what?
I don't even remember what I said.
It was something about living in a neighborhood, and being trapped in a neighborhood, but you know, with the desire to be in the wild. And
be a homesteader, yeah.
Is that close enough?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to shut up.
All right. Well, thanks for coming, guys. I want to give a caveat. I am not a beekeeper with 20 years experience and a whole bunch of classes and certifications behind my name. I started doing this literally a year ago, a year and about 2 months now. It was April 16th when I first installed the bees in that hive, the yellow hive back there, and that is my first hive. And at the time, so where I was going with that is the things I tell you. I'm a fast learner, and I've been studying bees, and I think they're all right. But particularly for anybody who might be watching on the internet when I post this, if I get some things wrong, please forgive me. It's basically what I've seen, what I've heard, what I've learned so far, and I'm early on the journey. Let me start by asking you guys, when you came to this event, what were you hoping you'd get from it? Because I'll shape what I'm going to talk about to fit what you were looking to get.
I have people come to me and crying and whining, the bees are going to eat me up, and I can't go out my front door.
You need to
Okay.
spray for them.
Yeah, and how am I going to get rid of them?
Yep.
Look at it, we got vinegar on them, or whatever. And I kind of want to get a way that I can calm them down and let them know
Okay.
that the bees aren't going to hurt them. They just make honey, and chances are they're just resting in your yard. They're not. It's not a
Yep.
hive. It's not a.
Okay,
They're
that's
not going to
good.
stay there all the time. So that's
Got
what
it.
I want to.
We'll talk about that for sure. Anybody else? Is there something in particular you hope to learn or have answers for?
And the different kind of bees, because there's so many
Okay.
different kinds.
Yeah.
So how to recognize, the good ones from the aggressive ones.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, let's talk then. Let's start out talking about bee safety and what do we have to fear and what should we not be fearful about. And so, first, let's address the issue of the swarm. So there are two circumstances when people might call me and say, I've got a bee swarm that I need you to remove. And one of those really is a swarm, and one of them, they're using the wrong word, right? One of them, you have almost absolutely nothing to be fearful about, and the other one, you might have something to be worried about depending on what type of bees it is. So let's talk about a true swarm. A true swarm, you're going to see a clump of bees, anywhere from a softball-sized clump to a basketball-sized clump, hanging on a tree or maybe on the underside of a picnic table, or maybe I've seen them on the side of a pickup truck, just wherever. And those bees, that is a swarm. What has happened is they were in a hive somewhere relatively nearby, probably about the length of about 3 football fields, about 300 yards. So somewhere within a 300-yard radius, there was a hive, and that might be a wild colony in a hollow tree, or it might be a beekeepers in the area. But they filled up the space. They had plenty of food, and they said it's time to make another colony. And so what happens is the bees start to create a special type of cell called a queen cell. The queen lays eggs in those cells. The worker bees give those cells lots and lots of what's called royal jelly, which is the food for baby bees. But they give these potential queens an ample amount of it. And then as the bees develop, they'll eat and they'll grow, they'll eat and they'll grow, and then they come to the time, most insects have a period, a pupa period, where they get enclosed and their body plan changes. It's a metamorphosis, just like we think of with a butterfly. And at that point, the worker bees will cap the cells. And now you can't see the larvae anymore. And when the cells are capped, the queen says, it's time for us to go. Because what's going to happen when those young queens hatch out, they're going to try to kill their rivals. And if the old queen is there, she may be old and stronger, or she may be, a little bit on the weaker side. And so she decides she's going to leave before they hatch out. And so what will happen is she'll take about 50 to 70% of the bees in the colony. It's an amazing thing to watch. I've never seen it in person, but on video, if you ever see somebody showing you what a swarm looks like, the bees just start pouring out of the hive. They go and they go and they go, and they're all flying around, and the sky is filled with bees, and you could be standing there just like this, right in the middle of them, have nothing to fear. because they are not defending anything. They're looking for a new home. Now, they can't fly very far, so when the queen comes out, they're going to follow the queen, and when she gets tired, they're going to find a branch or something to hang on. And they'll often use the same locations over and over again. So if you've seen a swarm on a tree in your neighborhood, it's very likely that sometime next spring there will be another swarm on the same tree in the neighborhood. But they'll just wait there. Now, there's a book that I could recommend if you're interested in this. It's called Honeybee Democracy. There is a scientist who has spent years studying how does a colony of individual insects make a decision about where they're going to live, because that's what happens. While they're in that swarm, they send out scouts, and the scouts go out and they're looking for any enclosed space that's about, and this comes from his research, about 10 gallons of empty space and a little tight entrance that they can defend. So they're looking for about a square-inch entrance, and if they find space and a tight entrance, they consider that as possible home. And the scouts will look for that. They'll go in and they'll explore, they'll measure, they'll look for signs of moisture, and if they decide that it's protected from moisture and it's the right size and it's the right size opening, they'll come back and they'll land on that ball of bees and they'll start to do a dance called a waggle dance. And in that waggle dance, they convey the direction and the distance so that other bees can go, and then they'll repeat it with varying degrees of enthusiasm. And if one of the scouts is really, really excited about the waggle dance, then other bees that are prepared to be scout bees, they'll go, oh, I should go check it out. And so they'll take the direction and they'll take the distance and they'll go look, and if they're excited too, they come back and keep dancing. And eventually the first one will get tired and will stop, but now there may be 2 or 3 others that come back to renew their advocacy for that site. Meanwhile, it's kind of like politics. Meanwhile, you have another scout has found another candidate, and they'll come back and they may have greater enthusiasm or less enthusiasm, and that will affect how many scouts go out to check it out. And so eventually they will start to eliminate the candidates. Nobody will be dancing for a site that is not enthusiastically endorsed by others. And so they'll start with 5 or 6 candidates, they'll drop it to 4, drop it to 3, and then they'll have consensus on one place where they're going to fly, and then they go. And so if you see a ball of bees in a tree, that's a swarm, and they will likely be gone typically within about 3 days. Now, I've seen a couple of cases where somebody said, no, these bees have been here for 2 weeks. And the one in particular where that was very clear that they'd been there a long time, what had happened was they had lost their queen. And they had been in that place for so long that they became what we call laying workers, which is really unusual. A lot of people have the idea that only the queen can lay eggs. And that's generally true. Because when you've got a hive with a queen present and with brood present, the pheromones that are released by the queen and the brood suppress the reproductive organs for all of the worker bees. But all of the worker bees are females. And honeybees have a different genetic system than what we're familiar with mammals. With mammals, you've got the male has half of the genetic code, the female has half of the genetic code. When the reproductive cells come together, now the baby has a full copy of a genetic code. That is called diploid genetics. And honeybees have both diploid but also haploid genetics, which means that a honeybee worker who's never mated with a drone can still lay an egg. And, if a chicken does that, chicken will lay an unfertilized egg, and it will never, ever, ever hatch under any circumstances. It just won't. But a honeybee egg, unfertilized, will hatch, but it will always and only be a drone. And so in this case of laying workers, we put them in a hive, and when we came back and looked a week later, instead of one egg in one cell, we saw 3 or 4 eggs in each cell. They were just scattered all over the place. And when the cells started to develop, they were all drones, which you can tell by the shape of the cells. They were all drone cells. So
What's a drone?
a drone is a male honeybee, and their only purpose in the colony is one thing: they fertilize queens. And other than that, they are useless. They don't defend the hive. They don't gather resources. Sometimes they don't even feed themselves. They wait to be fed by the workers. So. So a colony that has only drones is not going to last very long. But it's kind of it's an impulse to preserve that genetic line, because if you've got a colony that's otherwise going to just die, what they'll do as the last ditch effort is they'll make all these drones that carry some of their genetic information out to any other queens in the area that are trying to mate. And so it's arguably an adaptive feature. But anyway, so that's a swarm, and the swarms are not they're not dangerous because all they're really they don't have anything to defend. They don't have a hive. They don't have honey. The only honey they've had they've stored in their what they call their honey crop, where they can engorge themselves with a lot of it. And all they're doing is looking for a home. So you can stand right next to one of those. You can even, as long as you're careful not to crush them, you can scoop your hand through that ball of bees and have a ball of bees on your hand, and they won't sting. So they're no threat. The next stage is they'll find a place to live, and this is where sometimes people call me for a swarm, and they say, I've got a swarm in my tree, and I go to check it out, and it's not a ball of bees on the tree. It's bees flying in and out of a hollow spot on the tree. And that's not a swarm, that's a colony. Same thing if they say, I've got a swarm at my house, and what they mean is they're crawling up under the soffit on the eave of their roof. That's a colony. And in this case, they do have something to defend. They've got their brood, they've got their honey. If you pull out, break off a part of the soffit to be able to look up inside, you'll see a honeycomb just like you would see in a hive. And that's where, if those bees are gentle bees, you still have very little to be worried about unless you try to get them out. But you need to have somebody get them out. And then if they're Africanized, I tried to do a removal on the south side of the tracks. It was over right next to the Ebenezer Baptist Church. And those bees, they won. I got them in touch with someone else. To be truthful, they won mostly because I didn't have the building knowledge or skills to be able to feel like I knew the right way to kind of deconstruct the part of the house to get to the hive. So I needed to call somebody who knew more what they were doing there. But even so, they were so aggressive. My little camera case was covered with stings. I had a power tool with a rubber handle, and it was covered with stings. My gloves, I could look down. They weren't getting through, but I could see probably 50 stings, 25 on each hand roughly. They were after me because they were Africanized. So if you have bees in a colony and they are stinging you aggressively, yeah, you should fear that. Should you spray that? No. If they're in a structure that you can't remove them from, never ever spray the bees, because many bad things are going to happen if you spray bees in a structure. First, some of the bees are going to die. Some of them probably won't. It's really, really hard to get effective levels of an insecticide into a hive because the comb breaks up the spray path, and you can't get far enough out. So you kill a bunch of bees, and even if you killed all of them, what happens next? Bees stink when they die. just like, if you've got a volume of bees that's roughly the size of maybe the mass of a rabbit, imagine if you had a dead rabbit in your wall. It's going to attract flies. The flies are going to create maggots. The decay, it's going to just stink. Bees do that. I made the mistake. I took a frame of brood, and I knew that when I took it away that the brood was going to die. I think it was for the rain out. I was going to show you guys what a frame of brood looked like, and I took it back and set it on my porch, not realizing that eventually that brood was going to start to decay, and it got smelly. I had to bury it in sawdust to suppress the odor. So you got to be real careful with stuff like that. So you get bad odors, and then the other thing is you've got all this honey in your wall or in your roof, and it may be fine in the spring, but when it gets hot in the summer, that wax is going to start to melt, the honey's going to start to run, it's going to attract flies and cockroaches and rats and mice, and everything is going to be trying to get into your wall to get that stuff. So what's the right way? If you've got a situation that you think is threatening, there's a specialized category of beekeepers who do bee removals. And I've dabbled in that space, and I'm retreating from that space. To do that well, you need to have construction experience so that you know how to take it apart. And some removal experts will say, look, I'm just going to get the bees out, and then you'll want to call a contractor to do the repairs. And others will say, I'll do the whole job. So if you ever have to call somebody for that, just be sure to ask that question. You know, do you repair it, bring it back to what it was, or do I need to call somebody else to be ready to do repairs after you leave? But they should have insurance. They should have specialized equipment. They'll typically use a FLIR camera. FLIR stands for forward-looking infrared, and you can take a picture of a wall and see where the bees are inside the wall. And so you should have one of those. I don't. That's part of why I'm stepping out of that space. But what they'll be able to do is they'll come and cut into the building in a minimally destructive way, try to gain access to the comb of the honeybees. They'll cut out the comb. They'll, if they're trying to put it in a hive, they would then take the frame like this, and they take rubber bands, and you can do this little trick with whoa, there it went. Okay, lost one. So you can do, I didn't see how you were using your rubber bands the other day.
I just did corner to corner.
Yeah, that's, if you go
Both
corner
sides.
to corner, so if I were to do this with two of them on one side of the frame, now I have a floor to put the frame on. And so I could cut out sections of comb to fit the frame, and in this one, because I've got, this is called a foundationless frame, and it's got, this is here for added support. So I would cut out one section of comb and fit it in here, one section of comb and fit it in there, and then I would come over with two more rubber bands and go the other corners, and now we've got coverage on top of the frame as well, and that would hold the comb in place, and that would allow me to take the comb that was in your house and put it in a hive along with all the bees that were working on that. And Vanessa just did that. We did that, what was it, 2 days ago? Mm-hmm. So how's the hive?
Great.
Looking good? All right, so so they'll be able to do that. Now, after a removal, you'll still have some stragglers for a while, probably not more than a couple of weeks. And at that point, I don't know what other beekeepers would do. My personal recommendation is if you see stragglers and the comb has been removed, it's fine if you want to spray them, because they're not going to survive without the colony, and you know, best to just end the threat quickly. Now, once the bees have been removed, and maybe your removal expert will do that, that space, that void, needs to be filled if it can be. So if it's in a wall or the soffit of a roof, just stuff some fiberglass insulation up there, and then the entrance needs to be carefully sealed. You need to make sure there's not even the tiniest little space for bees to get in. And you have to be careful about what you seal it with, because the expanding foams, the bees will just chew it out. They'll go in and excavate their home, because forever, once bees have had a colony in a location, they will always want to be in that location. you'll probably notice there are some bees occasionally flying around in front of me, and you'll notice I'm ignoring them. The reason is I've got so much stuff that smells like a bee colony that they're coming around to check, is this a potential new home? And so let's talk about, so we talked about the concerns about dangers and the risks and about spraying or not spraying. What was the other question that somebody else had?
Different kind of bees.
Different kind of bees.
I had
Okay,
a
yeah.
question about the drones. The drone can't sting.
The drones cannot sting. That's right. So when you talk about different kinds of bees, let's talk at the broad. Let's talk in the field of honeybees first. Okay, just honeybees, and then we'll go broader. So within honeybees, you have the workers, which are female but not fertile. You have the drones, which are male and fertile. And then you have the queen, which is female and fertile, and she's also larger than the rest of the females, so you can recognize her in a couple of ways. And the queen's job is to lay eggs, and that's really just about all. She can lay up to about 2,500 eggs a day, every day, if she has the room. And so in this hive, it holds 20 frames like this, and I haven't had it full yet, but I expect that I will. I've got two 14-frame hives that are now every frame is in place, and a 14-frame hive. What the bees will typically do is they'll start at one end. With the style of hive that I use, I need to talk about hive styles in a minute too. But I'm going a little off. A 14-frame hive, I should expect in a good year with good bees, a strong colony, I could probably pull about 45 pounds of honey from a 14-frame hive and about 100 pounds of honey from a 20-frame hive. So at any rate, the queen will be able to reproduce all of that, about 2,500 eggs a day. And so very quickly, you can get up to 60,000, 80,000, 120,000 bees in a hive. Now, I started out with what's called a package. And the way a package is delivered is you're going to have a little wooden box with screen on the side so they can breathe, and a tin can inserted in the top that's full of sugar water with tiny holes poked in the bottom so that the bees can insert their snout into and they can drink the sugar water, but it won't just drip, drip, drip out, right? And they'll ship that package to you, although I drove down to close to College Station to pick one up. And because the type of hive that I use is not the standard commercial beekeepers type that's in use in the U.S., I had to install through a package, because the other way of receiving bees is to have a bunch of frames in a box, and it might be a wooden box or it may be something like this. This is called coroplast, corrugated plastic. And so if I had bought what's called a nuke or a nucleus colony, what I would have received would have been a box like this, except all of these frames, except maybe one, would already be drawn out with comb, and the queen might be in a separate container so that I could see her and make sure that she was safe. But I would get this box full of bees. Is that how you got your first bees?
The queen was already in the
Queen was
slip.
already loose, and that's the other way it can be shipped. But this would be called a nuke, and you could buy it this way. What I had to do was to buy the bees loose, and so that you had the bees, the screen, the feeder, and then you would have also inside a little box, and I've got it here. This is actually the one that my first queen came in. Little wooden box with screen on one side. It had a cork on one end and candy on the other. Now, I don't understand how this has happened, because I was pretty sure this is the one my first queen came in, but the cork is loose and the candy is still there. But normally what would happen is you just put this in the new hive, and the worker bees are going to start eating the candy, and that gives them, it takes them about 3 days, 2 or 3 days, and all that time the queen's pheromone is being released. They're able to feed the queen through the screen, so she survives. In fact, there are some workers, attendants for her inside this usually. But if they decide that they don't like the queen, they can't, for 2 or 3 days, they can't kill her. And that's important because if I just took a queen from another colony and stuck her in that one and killed the queen here, they'd kill the new queen even if their old queen was dead, because they know the scent of their queen. But this gives them about 3 days to get used to the scent of the new queen. And so typically by the time they chew through the candy, they're ready to accept a new queen, and they know that whatever queen they might once have had, they no longer have. And so that's how I installed those bees. All right, I'm jumping around a little bit.
Or you can use marshmallows.
Yeah, you can.
And I don't know if you're going to say this some of the time, I didn't this question, but I thought it was so interesting about when you had your little box and everything, and how they mark a queen.
Oh yeah.
And so, and how do they do that?
Well, so first thing you got to do is catch a queen. And I was going to show you this the other day, but you were on it with the clip before I could. There are little clips that look a whole lot like a hair clip that have just the right spacing to keep a queen in, but let the worker bees go out. And that's one thing that you can use it, and you would just squeeze it, let it down, release it. The problem that some people have with that is I've heard stories of people accidentally cutting a queen in half. So this, I think, is a little safer. In this mechanism, you see you've just got this inch-long slot, and you just find the queen and you set this down right on top of her. It's supposed to come with, but on this one I lost a sponge, a little sponge, and so I would use my gloved finger in this case to cover that, to keep the queen inside. Now that's temporary, to put her ultimately in this. This is a plastic version of this. It does the same thing. It's not quite as spacious, and I don't think you typically put attendants in this, but the queen can be fed through this. So there's 2 entrances. There's one here that I have covered over, and then there's another little plastic one right here. So what I can do is, if the queen is up here, just pop that off real quickly and hold these together and let her crawl through the neck of this into the queen cage, close that, and then I would put a candy plug or a marshmallow on this end, and then I can just introduce this into the hive. So this is a queen catcher, this is a queen cage, but you asked about marking, and for marking, you're going to want a marker pen. Oh no, now I need to find my marker cage. May have fallen out in the truck. So I'll show you my Plan B marker cage that I've actually decided I don't want to use anymore. This is one form, but I accidentally crushed a queen in a circumstance when I didn't think that it would have. So you've got this mesh here that's too tight for a queen to escape through. So you'll get her in here and then put the plunger in gently, gently, gently. You push the plunger up here so that her back is on the mesh and so that she can't move. And then you'll shake up the little paint marker pen, just put a dot on her back, and that's how you mark. Now I've used this successfully I won't say 6, but several times. The other system is a little box with a sliding plastic door. So it starts out kind of like this does. You lay it down over the queen, and then you push this sliding door to go under her feet to keep her in the box. And then there's another thing that slides a kind of a piston like that system used, but it's under more controlled pressure. So the same thing, you put her under pressure against a grid and then put a paint dot, give it a few seconds to dry. There's actually a system for the paint dots that some beekeepers follow and some don't.
Why would you mark it clean?
To make her easier to find.
There's so many.
Yeah. To find one bug in a box full of 20,000 bugs is really hard.
So that's when you want to separate the colony, make more boxes?
There's many reasons that one is you just might want to see the queen to make sure that she's healthy. Another one, there is a system of raising queens where if I've got 6 frames, or if I've got 10 frames in that hive, and I find the queen, I can move her to another part of the hive on the other side of a divider board, and I'll take her and the frame she's on, I'll take some worker bees and move them over, and she's got her own little colony there. She can keep doing her thing, and the other bees will start to make new queens. And when I see that they've got queen cells, I can take those other frames to another hive. And I need to do that because I've got one hive where I think I've got some Africanized genetics, and they're just more aggressive than I want to work with. And so I'm going to find that queen and kill her, and use this colony to create another queen, and take that queen to start raising up gentler babies. All right. So we were talking about types of bees. So you've got the drones, you've got the worker bees, you've got the queens, and that's really about all that you'll have in a typical hive. Within the worker bees, the female bees that aren't fertile, they have many different jobs, and the jobs change as they age. The first job that most of them have is going to be to clean up the hive and to be nurse bees and to make new comb. So they're younger, they can make the comb more easily, and they can generate the substance, that royal jelly. They consume pollen, they consume nectar, and they create royal jelly from it and feed the baby bees, and that's what gives them the nutrition that they need. And so they're nurse bees first. And then as they age, there are lots of different responsibilities. Some of them will clean up the things that have dropped on the floor of the hive and take it out, like bees die. So a corollary of the fact that a queen can lay 2,500 eggs a day is you actually, in a healthy hive, you have 2,500 bees every day that are dying, just out of old age, right? So it's always, it's not something to panic over if you see dead bees around your hive, unless the numbers are just really, really large. And what they'll do is, if a bee dies, typically a bee will try to leave the hive and die somewhere else. But if they don't make it, then there are Undertaker bees who will take the dead bees and carry them out of the hive. Yeah. As they age, they'll move essentially closer and closer to the entrance. When a bee comes in with nectar, she'll stop, and actually, I guess it's nectar. She'll kind of regurgitate. She'll give it to other bees who'll go store it in different places in the hive. And so the bees that are too old, they're leaving the role of a nurse bee and starting to graduate to other jobs. They'll be the ones who take the resources and actually put them in the cells. Or they may take honey from one location where a forager just deposited it and move it deeper in the hive, because that's where it ultimately needs to be. They may take, when they peel off the pollen from the place where they store it on their legs, it's in these clumps. But when you look at pollen in a cell, it's always tightly packed. It's those worker bees who do that. It's not the foragers who do the packing of the pollen. They just deposit these little clumps in the cells. And as you're inspecting, you can sometimes see, oh, look, they haven't packed that down yet. And then ultimately they'll go to either be guard bees or foragers. A guard bee is always ready to, well, there's a couple of things. Some of them are always watching the other bees that come in, so that if they are not the right bees from this colony, they'll have a fight on their hands. Because bees will, especially when it gets hot and dry, and there's not so many flowers around, they will rob from other colonies. And so if robber bees come and you've got a strong colony, the guard bees will be able to fight them off right there at the entrance. They don't lose anything. Or guard bees, if you open the lid, they're the ones that come out to meet the beekeeper. And sometimes they're relatively gentle and they'll circle around, so that you're basically saying, watch what you're doing, we got our eyes on you. Sometimes they'll thump you, and then you go, okay, they want me to leave. And if you're unprotected, that's the point where many times in my first year here, I would come up and I'd work this colony just like this. And then I got a little more cautious. I thought, well, I'll put on gloves or I'll put on a veil, but I'd still be, bare-legged. And I only ever got stung one time by these bees under normal circumstances. And then the other time was we were asked to move that hive temporarily so that the utility company could spray paint there. So I was moving the hive back from where I'd stashed it in Taylor and doing it at dark, which the bees don't like. And one of them found its way out of the hive. They were supposed to be all sealed up, out of the hive, and stung through my glove and got me. So these bees have stung me twice in over a year. So not too bad. All right, let's talk about other types of bees. And this will touch on one other thing that I wanted to do was a lot of people will say, we need to rescue the honeybees. The honeybees are in danger. And sometimes people are quite fearful, like that it's an existential threat to us that the honeybees are dying, and therefore we need lots of people to be beekeepers. I'm all in favor of lots of people being beekeepers, and I'm all in favor of honeybees thriving. But the truth is, honeybees as a species, they are not in danger. There was some concern about 10 to 15 years ago. You may remember discussion about colony collapse disorder. Bee colonies were dying, and there wasn't a widespread understanding of what was causing it. And by now, we think we got a pretty good idea that what it really was is not one thing, but a combination of things centered around the increasing spread of a pest, a parasite called a Varroa destructor mite. Now, if you've got destructor in your name, it sounds pretty rough, right? These are mites that originated on a different variety of bee, an Asian honeybee, which is larger and different in many respects from the European honeybee. And they crossed species. And so now beekeepers were dealing with a parasite that they never had to deal with before. And that was I think it was in the early 80s when that was discovered. And for a long time, people didn't realize the threat. They didn't recognize what it was doing. And then bees started to die, and people started to connect the dots that maybe it has something to do with these. Well, are the mites killing the bees directly? It didn't seem to be the case, at least not always. So what was going on? It turns out that the Varroa destructor mite is a carrier for many other diseases. Just like the mosquito is not going to kill a person, but may carry a disease that's going to kill a person, right? And so that's one of the big issues for beekeepers today, is to think about what are you going to do about Varroa mites? And there are many, many different opinions on what's the right. Just out of question, do you treat? You're treatment free. I'm treatment free. So one of the philosophies is that bees have been around for uncounted ages. They may very well have been the first animal domesticated by man. They're it goes back that long. They're probably, God or evolution, depending on your point of view, has probably provided them with a way to figure out how to deal with the Varroa mites. And so what's going to happen is that they will develop strategies for dealing with it, and that will be passed on. And so as time goes by, they'll be less and less vulnerable to the Varroa mites. Commercial beekeeping can't afford to look at it that way, because a hobbyist beekeeper like myself, if this colony dies, I have right now 14 other colonies, and I can repopulate it, right? for a commercial beekeeper who has thousands of hives, they put them on a truck, they take them out to California, they move them from the almonds up through the different. They can't afford to be trying to save every hive, and so they spend a lot more time trying to treat the mites. And I have some problems with, first of all, some of the treatments kill a lot of bees. Some of the treatments themselves are so hard on the bees that it'll weaken a colony and they'll struggle. Now, I'm just 1 year in, right? And so I'm not claiming a lot of experience, and there are a lot of people probably on YouTube who are going to argue me on this. But I am in several beekeeping groups on Facebook, some with thousands and thousands of members, and I see people talking about how hard it is to get bees through winter and how fortunate you are if all your bees make it through winter. And all my bees in my first year, all 3 hives, even in a weakened state, all 3 of them were pretty weak. I was really worried about them. They made it through just fine. And I didn't do anything for Varroa mites last year. Now, I did buy my bees from a company that tries to get Varroa resistant stock. And so I think it's just a good line of bees. Well, I'd say I bought my bees. 2 of the 3 line, well, I guess all 3 queens ultimately came from this hive. So they're probably all more or less that resistant, what I think is resistant stock. So not only that, but this year I'm not seeing problems in any of my hives related to Varroa. And so the people who say they're losing hives right and left, they're often the people who are treating for bees. And the funny thing is that they still, when somebody says, oh, I just lost a hive, the first thing they ask is, well, why didn't you treat for Varroa? It's like, are you not recognizing that you're the one having this problem? You're the ones losing the colonies. A lot of us who are in the treatment-free space are not reporting the same struggle. And so, but at any rate, I've probably gotten a little more political than I should.
Can you say why they're more treatment-free? Why they're more resistant?
Well, so there are several things, and some of them have occurred naturally, and some of them have been developed by breeders. There is a behavior that's called hygienic behavior. And there are some bees that can smell, so bees can detect when some of their brood are sick. And they'll uncap a brood cell and remove it if it's infected with something. And bees have begun to have the sensitivity to smell the Varroa mite in the brood, because that's where that's where the reproduction is really that's where the Varroa mite reproduction is happening. Is they get into the cell where a baby bee is being grown, and they lay their eggs there. They reproduce the Varroa mite right with the bee. They feed off the baby bee, weakening the bee. And so what's happening is some lines of bees are thought to be able to remove that infected brood, killing those Varroa mites and keeping the population down. Other bees just swarm a lot, and every time they swarm, there's a period of about 2 weeks where there's no baby bees being laid because a new queen is being generated. And during that time, the Varroa mites start to die off without being able to reproduce themselves, and so it's kind of a reset on the population. It doesn't get rid of the Varroa mites, but it controls the levels of Varroa mites. So there are several things like that that are treatment-free strategies for that. All right, so we were talking about different types of bees. Honeybees are not under threat because beekeepers keep reproducing the supply. I've got 16 hives. If I lose 10 of them, by this time next year, I'll be back at 16 hives or even more. Because after all, I started this year with 3. So honeybees, they're not at risk the way some hysterical media will report it. However, there is a genuine threat to native bees, or what are called solitary bees. So if you look at your gardens, you may see an occasional bumblebee. you may see some little tiny things that look like flies. Some of them may be flies. Some of them are actually a variety of bees. And a lot of these other types of bees, they live by themselves. They don't form colonies. They don't generate honey. So they don't have a commercial value other than the pollination. But there are certain types of pollination that need those bees and not honeybees. There are things that a bumblebee can pollinate that a honeybee can't, and vice versa. And so if you are inclined to be concerned about the bee population, those are the bees that really need our attention more than honeybees. I'm glad for you to have a honeybee hive in your backyard, but if you don't want all the work that's involved in maintaining a hive and protecting yourself from stings and harvesting honey and packaging honey and all of that, if you don't care about that, you can order habitats for solitary bees. And you just put it out there and you ignore it. And you don't have all the work, and generally those don't sting or don't sting as much. And so it's a way to help the environment without feeling like you've got to, I mean, this is a lot of work, really.
Is a mason bee one of those?
Yes, mason bee is one of those solitary bees, and they're one of those where it's easy to find a commercially generated habitat for them. Now, there is one caveat that people are starting to have about those habitats, and that is the concern that normally they're far isolated. So a mason bee will live in like a tube. Sometimes it's just a cardboard or a tube drilled in wood. So if you put a bunch of those right together, you're concentrating the population, and now disease and parasites can spread among them. So there's questions about whether, what you should be doing there, but you can do your own research on that.
Could you have that and then,
Sure. Yep.
They're gonna attack each other.
The one type of bee that unfortunately we don't have here that I would love to experiment with someday, there is a bee called a stingless bee, and they make honey. And the stingless doesn't mean defenseless. They don't sting, but they do bite, and they pluck hair. And but those are usually in tropical countries, and we don't have them here. And I think it would be illegal for you to import them here.
Have you heard the story about vanilla beans and why vanilla beans could never be grown outside of Africa?
No.
Yeah, there is a certain type of bee that can only that kind of bee can populate a vanilla bee, a native
Interesting.
vanilla bee. And
That's
that's
cool.
why there was the big push to get artificial vanilla, which is basically molecularly identical
Yeah, interesting.
to grown.
One other interesting pollinator that we should know about, because they're just moving into this area as a pollinator. I got a call for a bee removal this spring. It was right after the ice storm, and a branch had broken off in a tree in a neighborhood right here in Hutto, and the resident noticed a problem with it. He called me. I came out, took one look. I'm like, those are not bees. It looked like a hornet nest. A hornet nest is a big ball of paper, right? They're a paper wasp at heart. But this is like basketball size, or maybe even 2 basketballs of volume there, attached to a tree. The tree was maybe that size. And so it was growing up about 10 feet up. Imagine 2 basketballs around a branch in that tree. So I thought it was hornets. And I'm like, I'm not touching that. But then I looked closer, and the wasps that were on it were, a hornet is going to be a full-size wasp. These were like 1/4 to 1/3 of an inch. I'm like, what in the world is that? I've never seen anything like that. Are they huge ants? Is that, I didn't know what I was dealing with. I did a little bit of research, and I found there is a Mexican honey wasp. And we used to be outside of its territory, but as the climate changes, they're moving north. And we've confirmed we have Mexican honey wasps here in Hutto. They are a relatively gentle wasp. If they're 10 foot up in a tree, just ignore them. Just let them live. They are pollinators, almost as effective as honeybees. They do pollinate some different plants, so it's beneficial to have both. They're not competing with each other very much. And so I would say, if you see that, count it a blessing. Just don't throw anything at their nest, and you'll be fine.
Wonder what that tastes like.
Yeah, I don't know. I know in Mexico they do harvest the honey. It's harder to harvest than honeybee because honeybees use the nice wax comb. Apparently, the honey in those nests is just stored in paper. But also, the grubs are extracted and they'll fry up the grubs and treat that as a delicacy. Okay, I said I wanted to talk about hive types. You guys have probably all seen, and I don't have any examples of this. I should have had you brought a nuke. But the conventional commercial beekeepers in our country use what's called a Langstroth system. And it's named after Reverend Langstroth, who lived in the 1800s. And he did a whole lot of study about things like how much space do bees require between combs. It's called bee space. And he kind of designed a scientific approach to how you put artificial frames in a hive in optimal conditions. And so the essence of the Langstroth system is you build a box and you fill it with frames, and the bees build their comb on the frames and fill it with brood and fill it with honey. And you put another box on top of that when they need more space. And so now you've got 10 frames here. You add another box with another 10 frames. And with most beekeepers, they'll use 2 of those boxes for their brood. So the queen will go up and down between those, and all of those will have brood and honey. Then you can use another box, and you might want to use what's called a queen excluder. Queen excluder is spaced just perfectly so that worker bees can go up and down, queens cannot. And so if you have the queen excluder there, the queen has to stay down low. And then you can build this one, and this one is called a super, meaning it's from superstructure, and it just means something built on top of something else, right? But the idea is you've got your two box brood chamber, and everything that goes on top of that is called a super. And the theory is everything above that is only going to have honey because the queen is down below. And so now when they fill up the brood box and the workers need a place to store honey, they'll keep going up and they'll put their honey higher and higher in the box. And what that does for commercial beekeepers, it makes it super easy. You come in and you take off the supers, you take them away and harvest it, you bring them back and put them back on the hive if they're needed. And then in winter, when you don't want the bees to have too much extra space, you just take the supers off and store it, and you insulate them and close them in, protect them from the elements, and they go through winter that way, and in the spring you can put the supers back on. I can understand why you would want to do all of that if you're a commercial beekeeper at a large scale. That's also what they do when they're taking them to pollination places like, to do the grand tour of the farms in California. But for a backyard beekeeper, I can't see it. I don't want it. I don't want to do it that way. It doesn't make sense to me. So there are the other type. What my system uses is called a Layens system, and it also is named after the originator, George de Layens from France. And it is a horizontal system. So in a box like that has 20 frames, you would start at one end. You'd have an entrance down here. You put a few frames and the queen lays them out, and that's the brood. You put a few more frames when she gets those filled out, and you always have a divider board at the end so that it's saying to the bees, this is your space, right? There may be a way to get to the rest of the space, but it kind of psychologically, they want to build in their brood. They don't want to go under a divider and be separated from the rest of the hive. And so you keep adding frames, and in my experience in a Layens hive, they're typically, they'll use about 7 frames for brood. And then the rest, and it's usually nearest the easiest source for fresh air. So the queen likes to lay the brood closest to where they can control airflow. And then the honey goes further and further back where if it gets hotter there, that just helps the honey dry out faster. So we go further, and what you end up finding is your brood space is over here and your honey is over here. And the other element is, as someone who's getting up in years, I don't have to lift a 30 or 60 or 75 pound box and move it around to work with my hive. All I have to do is pick up 1 frame at a time and move it along. I started this at 57 and I wanted to be able to do it for many years to come, so I thought, if I don't have to be lifting all that heavy stuff, that makes more sense for me. And so I'm mostly using lay-ins. The other system that I'm experimenting with at home, and I talked to Debbie. I'm so sorry. My brain does that sometimes. Yeah, I talked to Debbie about a hive in her yard, and we thought we had one. We thought that there was a swarm that took shelter in her garage and then flew away. But I've been experimenting with a system called the Comfort Hive. And this is so easy, so easy. If you've got 2x8s and a table saw, you can build a hive in an hour or less. And they're about 1 foot by 1 foot. They're by 6 inches deep. 6 inches deep, roughly 12 inches by 12 inches. Instead of using frames, you just put bamboo skewers or wooden dowels across the top. And then you stack another box on top of that with another row of dowels, another box on top of that. And it's the same thing. The brood is going to be near the bottom, the honey's going to be near the top, and but you're dealing with much smaller boxes, so they're lighter. I think that might be a good approach for a hobbyist or a backyard beekeeper. It's probably not something that I'm going to use for large numbers of hives, but maybe a few in my backyard. So those are the hive types that I talked about. So you've seen the nuke. This is a smaller nuke. This one only holds 3 frames, and I've used it to take a really weak, small number of bees and let them get stronger where they don't have to defend a lot of space, so that when they're stronger, then I can move them into something larger. And you've generally got this sort of an opening. I can set it to ventilation only. This is a queen excluder setting, so that a queen or a drone can't go in and out, but the worker bees can. This is fully open. And if I've got a really weak colony here, they're vulnerable to robber bees from other colonies. And so I can narrow this down like so to give them less space to defend, but they can still go in and out. So lots of flexibility with these. And I've made about, I don't know, 5 of these, 5 or 6. This one could be used as I think it's a 6-frame nuke. But this is actually intended as a swarm trap. So the way that I went from 3 to 16 hives in one spring has a lot to do, it has to do with several things. I did some swarm removals, I did some cutouts, but I did a lot of swarm trapping, where I'll take this and I'll strap it to the side of a tree. And for me, it's been really productive to put a swarm trap in the same vicinity as a place where I'd done a cutout. So there was a lady in our church who, and this gave me my 2nd colony last year. She had bees in her water meter box. And actually it was her septic filtration box, but one of those utility boxes set into the ground. So I cut out the comb. I may not have found the queen, or maybe I found her and she just didn't last very long. I had to re-queen it, but that now is my 2nd colony, and they're doing great after some struggles last year. But I went back in her yard since I'd had to do a cutout, and I strapped it to a tree, and on that tree I've caught 2 swarms in boxes like this. And those bees are now in my apiary out in Cameron. So the idea here is you're going to put inside it some lemongrass oil for a commercial preparation called Swarm Commander. And this is a slow release capsule. We were talking about how if you use too much of the attractant, you can actually make it so strongly scented in here that the bees won't want to move in. But if you use just a controlled amount in a release, you can take like a cotton ball and spray it and drop it in a Ziploc bag and seal it up and leave it there, and they'll still get enough scent through that. Let me pass this around. You can smell what this smells like to a bee. Just circulate that into it. Is a queen's pheromone, and that's the part that will entice a scout to come look at this box. It won't entice them to move in. What entices them to move in is then to take some chunks of old comb, preferably brood comb, and it can just be ratty, old, messed up comb like this. Drop it in the bottom or put it on a frame, and now this box smells like home. Furthermore, this box, I don't have to provide any of that with this particular box, because as you look at this, you can see some fragments of comb on the walls. This box is forever going to smell like bees have lived here. And so if I hang this on a tree, if there's a swarm anywhere in the vicinity that's looking for a place to live, they're going to want to come here. Where the I didn't anticipate how strong that was going to be. I've still got it. Smell lemon fresh. And it's just lemongrass oil. It mimics the queen's pheromone. So this will help me trap swarms. And as a good preventative measure, if you've had a swarm in a vicinity, like you might want to, I can strap one of these now that I have them back for about a couple of weeks. When I first installed the bees from this into the hives up there, I would in that apiary. It's like a quarter mile back through the woods, and it was muddy, so we were trying to use a lawn tractor to carry everything back and forth, but we got a flat tire on the trailer, and we fought all morning through the mud, and so ended up just leaving this box there for a couple of weeks, and it's like, I really need them back, but I got them back now. So at any rate, if I hang this up, I would put frames in it just like you saw, and the bees would come in, and when you first see them, you can just ignore them for a while. Give them time to set up house, and this will be their home, and they're building on frames, and so everything's good, and then when you're ready to transfer them into another type of hive, you're ready to go. And then the final thing I want to show you here, well, not the final thing, one more thing I want to show you. This is an internal feeder. So if I've got a colony, I'm in the summertime and all the flowers are dried up and dead, and the bees I'm not sure if they're going to make it through to the winter or have enough, I can put sugar syrup in here and hang it just like a frame, and they can feed from that right there and build up the reserves that they need to make it through the winter. All right, so let's talk about protective gear. The simplest type of gear that you might want would be gloves, and you can get, these are beekeeper gloves. They usually have leather on the hands, some pretty dense woven fabric here, maybe some mesh, or you can use some heavy-duty rubber gloves. The bees don't like it, and the best one. I said rubber. It's actually nitrile gloves. The bees don't like it. Even if you get thin nitrile gloves, they can technically sting through nitrile, but they don't like the texture of it, and so they usually won't try. So gloves are a part of it. This is one type of a veil, and I really like this type because it comes with the hat, and the brim of the hat keeps the veil far away from my face. A lot of the other styles of beekeeper veils, if you're looking up, particularly like we're removing bees on a ladder from something up above, the veil can fall against your skin, And if the veil touches your skin, the bees can find you. So I've seen lots of photos on the beekeeper list in Facebook where people have puffy faces because the veil got through. So I actually, when I'm dealing with a colony that's pretty gentle, I feel safer with this than than going with something heavier, because this stays a good safe distance from my skin. However, obviously I'm vulnerable in other ways. Then we have one style of suit. This is a full beekeeper suit. This was like a, I don't know, $25 Amazon special. And it's okay. I want to say I don't really trust them, even though it's not letting me down very much. I've even worked with Africanized bees, and they've never stung me through this suit. But this suit has some vulnerabilities in that it's not engineered as effectively around the ankles and around the wrists as some suits are. And so I have been stung through the ankles below where the suit came down to. They found the gap between where my shoe started and the suit ended. And sometimes these types of suits, like on that one, there's a metal spring here to keep it away from your face, and that broke and came out, and so I have to be really careful with the other suit of this type. But it's got flaps, and it's got Velcro, and it's got zippers, and it's inside out, and that's okay. Just straighten it all out. It's not bad if you're just looking for medium level protection. The way that it protects you from stings is it uses that dense woven fiber to keep the sting from being able to go through. And then the industrial strength bee suit. This one, you're going to see it's 3 layers of mesh. On the inside, you have this little fine mesh that fits against your skin. It's pretty comfortable, but it doesn't give a lot of protection. It lets air pass through, and that's great. On the inside, and from a distance you can't see it, but you're welcome to come up and examine it. You've got a heavy mesh that takes up more space. It provides separation between your skin and where the bee can get to. And on the outside, you've got another thin mesh that keeps the bees from being able to get through the heavy mesh below it. So you've got 3 layers of protection there, and what it does, instead of making a dense woven fabric that keeps the stinger from penetrating, this one puts space so that they can't get their stinger close enough to your skin to penetrate. And that one, that type of suit will run you several $100s, but if you're doing a lot of it, it's well worth it.
Can you show the different face of it?
Oh yeah, this one has a veil like so. And I am not a fan of this veil. By the way, I have been stung through the top of the head. That's the only place they've gone through. And it might have been through the veil part instead of through back here. I'm not quite sure.
My son used to use it with a baseball cap underneath.
Yep. The baseball cap does 2 things. It gives you an extra layer of protection here, but it also holds the veil away. And that's the reason I don't like this, is this has a tendency to kind of collapse towards you, and you can be stung through the veil that way. But it has, this one in particular has a feature that's kind of nice. If you're away from the bees, without enough time to take the suit off, but you're thirsty, you can zip this down, take a drink, and then zip it back up. But a good beekeeper often will learn to take a drink right through a veil. So you can put the veil up here, just push it through, and the water flows through a veil, no problem. All right, so other equipment, it's a smoker. And the smoker is just a metal chamber. It's got a solid bottom, but there's a hole here in the middle. And this is the bellows, forces air through the hole. Inside, sometimes I have to, where did I put my hive tool? we have a specialized tool called a hive tool that is the Swiss Army knife for beekeepers.
What's the smoker for?
The smoker, so the bees, the way they communicate that defense of their colony is needed is by releasing a pheromone called the alarm pheromone. And you know, the queen pheromone smells a little bit like lemons. The alarm pheromone smells a little bit like bananas. But what happens is the way they smell is they have antenna, and the scent molecules bind to the antenna, and that's how they smell it. When you waft smoke through the hive, the smoke particles bind to those same locations on the antenna, so they can't smell the alarm pheromone. So the effect, and it seemed to me, to my way of thinking, I'm not sure it works at all, even a little bit on Africanized bees. they just act like nothing's happening. But on a typical honeybee or colony, the effect would be if one bee gets mad and tries to sting me, if I weren't smoking, I'd now have 5 or 10 more trying to sting me too, because they scent that they can smell the sting. But if I've smoked them, one bee tried to sting me, and that's the end of it, because the others don't get the message that happened.
Do they also eat the honey?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I believe that's so there's a lot of discussion about the mechanism. Why we know that smoke has a calming effect. We're not sure why. The alternative theory to what I explained was that they think there's a fire. They think that they might have to have an emergency evacuation, and so in preparation for that, they go and start consuming their honey stores, engorging themselves with honey. And then they're not as inclined to sting because it's harder for them to bend their abdomen to reach you, and they're just more docile. And they're also, their mind is on evacuation, not on defense. So I'm not sure which one of those is more true than another, but those are the two leading theories for why smoke works. But the idea here is you can take various types of smoker fuel, anything from dried grass to dried leaves, to wood chips from the garden, to some will use wood pellets like you would from a pellet grill, to cow dung. I've used rabbit manure because I raise rabbits and I have plenty. So almost anything that will burn, if it will produce smoke, is good. Now, I do tend to stay away from chunks of wood. So if I'm using the wood chips, I try to be real careful with that, because some things, what you ideally want is plenty of stuff at the top that will absorb heat, kind of soak up some of the heat, produce more smoke, and not produce a lot of really hot air and possibly embers to go into the bees, because that really can damage them or hurt your hive. All right, I think I have shown you everything I came to show you, covered the topics that I thought to cover. Any other questions?
So when you collect a swarm, it goes into, once you collect it into a hive, what are the chances are that those ones will stay there? Because I've heard people say, well, we'll see if they stay.
Yeah, it's fairly common that they'll actually leave. There are some things you can do to improve the chances. One is if you've got other bees and you've got some comb with brood on it, if you provide them with brood, they'll almost always stay, because they won't abandon the babies. The other thing that you can do is lock up the queen for a time, either in a queen clip or just by turning the entrance to queen excluder. If you can keep the queen there, they won't leave. So those are the two big things. But I had many different adventures last year. One of which was a cutout from a roof that was actually the second story roof, or a second level roof. So I was on one section of roof taking bees out of the next level. And I got all the bees out, I got all the honey out, I had a little bit of cleanup to do. I'd been working on it for 3 days. I was done on day 3. I started to go down, and I was using a ladder on the roof to secure my access, and it slid. And I slid down and I fell off the roof and I broke 4 ribs.
Oh.
That's
not good.
It was not. It was some painful weeks. And the worst part, to add insult to injury, we had the bees. I had an assistant who was going to take the bees and put them in the hive, and I told him what to do. I think I didn't tell him to close the entrance to Queen Excluder. And so by the time I got out of the hospital, 24 hours later, they were gone. So I thought, well, at least I got the bees, and I didn't get the bees. But I did get 3 gallons of honey from that. So.
Oh, wow.
All right, so the rest of our time together is going to be optional. I have 2 bee suits, multiple veils.
I brought mine.
She's got a suit. If anybody wants to take a closer look at the garden hive, I'll be glad to let anybody who wants to come have a chance at an inspection. Or you can come right up here and you can look.
Another question. I was helping move. Well, I wasn't really helping. I was like observing a swarm being moved into a hive, and I was holding the ladder because it was super high up. And so the beekeeper had given me half of the bee suit.
Uh-huh.
So when she bumped the swarm fall into the bucket, because it was like 20 feet
Really
up.
high up.
Yeah, bumped it like the swarm was so big that some of the bees fell over the bucket right in front of me, and they attacked me. So I got stung like 60 times on my legs. But she told me to run into the house into the dark.
Yes.
And so I wonder, like, if you're out in nature and stuff
Yeah.
like that, what you do, like, you should get attacked
Yep.
by bees. What does the dark
Okay.
have to do with it?
And that's a good thing for us to talk about, because we're in an area where Africanized bees exist.
Right.
That surprises me a lot, that they would sting you in that circumstance. Makes me wonder if they actually had started building an open air hive. Did they have comb in that cluster?
I don't know for sure because I didn't hang around to find out.
Understandable. So it's surprising.
But they had been there for it was in a friend's backyard, and they had been there for like 5 days already.
Yep. Okay. That sounds like they probably had started. They had gone from thinking this is a temporary hangout
Right.
to this is our home.
Right.
So that's why the stings. So here's what. So to go indoors, ideally in a darkened room, it doesn't have to be completely dark,
Right.
but you want the lights off, right? And ideally there's at least one window, because the bees will be attracted to the light. They'll all go over by the window. They'll start to leave you alone.
Okay, that's exactly what I did. I ran into the dark. The sliding glass door was still there, so
Yep.
they were trying to get back. And I was just like pushing them off of me.
Yep.
Because there were so many.
So it's probably, if you're trying to get a lot of bees off, it's probably more effective to bounce them off
Okay.
than to push them off. If you're pushing them off, you might get stung. But if you just jump in the air, just hop up and down,
Okay.
the jolt will often shake them loose.
Okay.
You'll notice a lot of times in working with bees, we'll shake a frame to get bees off of the frame. And,
I have a question. So I moved the boxes at the corner of my property, and I was mowing last night, like about 7:30. Do they like the loud noise or not? Because I thought they were chasing me, and I started running into the yard.
yeah, if they seem to be chasing you, they were chasing you. They can be upset by particularly cyclical, like motor-based noises, and it depends very much on the bees in question. I ran a weed eater feet from this hive, and they were swirling around, but I didn't get stung.
I really don't think that they were chasing me, but one or two got stuck in my hair. So I just
Is
moved
there
the mower,
anything more terrifying than having a bee stuck in your hair?
Running, and I ran into the car, and I had a towel, and I kept just trying to get them off my hair. But
Yeah.
I just got one of my hair. I think it was more of myself, my brain thinking that there were more than one.
Yeah.
Sure.
In the Africanized bees that I fought last week, 2 of them found their way into my veil,
Oh.
and one of them got stuck in my beard, and it's like you can't do anything. I literally, I had to go get in my truck. They would follow me to my truck. In my truck, there'd be 20 bees in there with me, still trying to sting me. So I would have to roll down the windows and drive a quarter mile, and then they'd leave. And then I could safely take the veil down and try to get that bee out. And meanwhile, you're going, is it going to sting? Is it going to? And I did get stung once behind the ear, and I'm not sure if the bee that got stuck didn't sting because it was the same one that had already stung me, so it no longer had a stinger, or if it was a second bee and I just got lucky and it never managed to get me.
So with your experience, what is the best time for me to mow around or with it around the beehive?
Well,
In the middle of the day when they're out? Or?
There would be fewer bees around to be aggressive in the middle of the day on a sunny day. Like today with the clouds that we have, some of them will be out, but some of them may be staying at home. So they may be, if we go work this hive, there's a slightly, I wouldn't be nervous about it, but there's a slightly increased chance that they'll be a little aggressive today because of the overcast. So middle of the day would probably be the safest. The best thing, wear long pants, long sleeve shirt, wear some gloves. If you a veil is not very much to get one of these. $15-$20 at most.
I do have one.
You have one?
Yeah.
I would just protect yourself. Mow the section that's nearest the hive first, and go outward from there. And once you're 20 feet away, then you can cool off. Take some of the gear off.
I don't think they were trying to protect me because it was 7:30. They were all coming back, and I had to mow down all the wildflowers
Gotcha.
that were there too.
That could be. They were just on their way back to the hive, getting ready to settle in for night.
Because we moved them with my son. My son, when he went to college and when he needed some more money, he would remove bees.
Yeah.
So he kind of has an idea what to do. So he brought one of these, one removal to the house. And that's
There you
the
go.
one that we fed.
So that's
the
when you
winter
say,
and-
"Hey son, got a
I
mowing
told
job
you.
for you."
So I don't think they got in my house because I haven't seen anything else inside the shed when they were after we moved the boxes.
I think that's a safe assumption. If you had boxes there and that's where you saw the bees, they probably were not exploring places to get in your house.
And that was the beehive that had the bees before, but we
Yep.
have cleaned it.
Do you sell your honey?
I haven't collected any honey yet, but I think I may have my first collections in the next few weeks. So.
You said you got 3 gallons last year.
Well, that was not from my hive. That was from a cutout. And if you take honey from a cutout, technically in Texas, I don't think you're allowed to sell that. You can consume it yourself. You might be able to share it for free, which is what we ended up doing. But because you don't know what's what pesticides has it been exposed to? Did the homeowners try to spray the bees? You don't know any of that for certain. I mean, you can ask them and they can say, no, we didn't spray, but from those of us who have done removals, you find out that people aren't always honest with you. So you're supposed to treat that honey differently than if you harvest it from a hive that you control. And the reason I haven't harvested yet is in the first year that you have bees, so it takes the equivalent of it's either 7 or 17, I'm not sure which one I'm remembering right, but 7 or 17 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax for the comb. And so when I first installed those, I had frames that had what's called foundation, which is just a little thin sheet of wax that they could build on, but most of the wax for the honeycomb had to come from them. And so instead of making honey last year, they made enough to keep them alive, but I was feeding them all through the spring to be able to get them to this point. And to be able to build up the wax, it really compromised their honey production. So going into the fall, I was like, I want to leave them everything that they've made to make sure they have enough food for the winter. And this year, some of my colonies may be like that too. I may not pull from some, but I've got 2 colonies in particular where if I don't start to pull honey, they're going to swarm because they're going to run out of space for the queen to lay eggs because all the cells are full with honey. One of them is that mean hive, which I've got to go deal with later today, I think. All right, does anybody want to go look at the bees? Okay.
Is it a group or somebody, or would you be able to make a trip to my house and see my honey bee to see if we are doing it right? Because what it happened, it is hung to the top of the hive. We didn't cut it and put it in frame.
Oh, I see. So it's just on the lid.
What we add is some frames, and we put some empty frames on the bottom box and just put it on top.
Okay.
Do you know a contact of somebody that? Because I don't want it to die, fly away.
Well, they
are
won't
still there.
die. They won't die because of that, and they won't fly away because of that. If they're happy there, they'll just continue to use that.
They've been there
What
over
will
the
become
month.
what it will make harder is the honey harvest at the end of the season. So you could go one of two directions. You could say, I want to just leave them alone for now, and then straighten it out at the end of the year, or somebody could help you fix it right away. So it's a Langstroth system, right, where you stack boxes on top of boxes.
It's a box that it has 10 frames now.
Yeah.
And you have the opening at the bottom.
Yeah.
And we stack the one that they are living on top. But the top, half of the lid is full. It looks like about this size. And there is a honeycomb there.
Interesting.
Do you have an inner cover on the top of that? Or is it just box?
I don't think it has any. Yeah.
So Vanessa knows more about that type of hive system than I do.
I could come look at it. Are you Mabel?
Yes.
Let me take a picture. I'm Vanessa. I would like to come see.
Because the first year we tried to do it with my husband. My son actually removed the hives of this.
You're welcome.
And we had
All right, guys, I'm going to stop the video. We can still chat, and we can go see the hive if anybody wants.